Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next The Dragon Prince video. This is going to be my rewatch review for The Dragon Prince Book 3 Sun. So not too long left now until Book 4 Earth starts. In fact, they just recently made two kind of interesting announcements ahead of it. One is that they will actually be airing, kind of premiering the first episode of Book 4 tonight on Twitch. I'll have the pinned comment below be the details on that, just so I'm not trying to remember them off the top of my head here. But basically it's at sort of like, I think it's 1 a.m. Ireland time for me. And obviously equivalent times elsewhere. Netflix will be doing a stream where they'll be having news about some of their other animated shows, and to promote The Dragon Prince Season 4, they will be showing off the first episode, which I think is a really good marketing move for a show that has been off the air for 3 years. This is actually a really good marketing move to build hype ahead of just releasing the episodes in a few days. So that's a good move. It does mean, though, that this video will have to be my Book 3 review as well as my speculation on Season 4. So, lot to cover here. So, jumping straight into it, I suppose, Season 3. Again, it's very interesting how much ground, in this case, is covered. I think the first two books, you could say, like, reflecting on them, it's interesting how they don't cover as much ground as you think. But here, we cover a lot, because we cover, like, Ezran becomes king, has to step down as being king, and becomes king again, all in the same thing. He goes back to Katalis, and then he's back in Xadia, all in, like, the one season. And it just highlights that the amount of, like, traveling that the characters do goes, like, way, way up, and there's a lot more moving around. Because it's the one that is most heavily involving Xadia, I think it is the show at its best, and that's what I'm so eager to see, what the kind of breakdown is like going into the next couple of books. Like, is the story going to be primarily set in Xadia? Because obviously that's where we need to explore. Like, obviously there's a lot of the human kingdoms we've never properly been to, but the interest, I think, in the show is more about the different magical sort of kingdoms and the different races of elves and stuff like that. That's what we're waiting to see more. And here, at least, obviously, we get to see where the Sun Elves are kind of from. We get to see the Storm Spire. But they still, for the most part, I think, have held back on overly showing you too much of Xadia. It still feels like, for the most part, the series has been very focused on the breach, and then a little bit sort of like either side of the breach, in the sense that, like, the amount of travel between, say, Katalis and Stormspire doesn't seem like a huge amount of distance. So there's so much ground still to cover in terms of, like, introducing Earth Elves. I don't think we've seen anything on, like, Water Elves, and so on. Like the homeland of the Star Elves, like the different things like that are the things that we're eagerly awaiting to see. So what do I want to talk about first? I suppose first flashbacks, because the book opens up on a flashback, and then just before we get into the final kind of, like, 3-part really big finale of Season 3, we also have another flashback that is the next stage of the flashback story from last season. That's been the kind of driving force of the plot, the cycle of revenge. So the first one is that we get introduced to Ziard, I think is his name. I don't think they say it in the show, but I think they confirmed outside the show his name is Ziard. He is one of the first, or I think he might be the first Dark Mage. And we see him defending the city of Ilarion from Sol Regum. So this is the Sol Regum backstory. And basically, we see Sol Regum is a former king of the dragons, and he does not like humans at all. And I think the term lesser beings is kind of thrown out here. And he seems to believe very much so that humans are lesser beings. And it's basically a threat here. I'll burn down your city unless you stop using dark magic. Of course, Ziard refuses, because this is what gives humans magic. And so we get this dark magic versus a dragon. And Zeard is killed, but he blinds Sol Regum, establishing the dragon that, of course, Rayla and Callum and Zim end up meeting in the show. So that's an interesting scene, because it's also the origin of like Viren's magical staff, and they confirm in the backstory that it was given to Zeard by one of the Great Ones, heavily implied to be Aravos. So the staff seems to ultimately have its origins from Aravos. So that's an interesting one to factor into things. Then it's actually Aravos who asks Viren to tell him the story of how Avazandum was killed. And it's the next stage of the story. So this is post the death of the queens. Quite a bit of time has passed. And it seems like, for the most part, like, it's still on Harrow's mind, but he's been able to kind of move on from it with what has happened here, because they were successful fundamentally on their mission, and they have restored the kingdoms, the harvests, and stuff like that. Things are better for basically all of the human kingdoms. And he's willing, even when Viren offers him the suggestion of revenge straight away, he's willing to put that aside, because there is a sense of peace, and he can focus on just raising the boys, and that's it. And this is what makes this scene so interesting, is that, like, Viren is the one to pull those emotions, that want for revenge, out of Harrow. Now, it is still in there, but I think it's very notable about the character that he was, for the most part, willing to put it aside because of peace. But then Viren, the emotional manipulation here is quite harsh, because he obviously brings up, like, you don't have your wife. What if your wife wanted to see the kids? The kids wanted their mother. And he makes Harrow emotional, and then immediately sort of gets him to agree to this. Now, the spell is quite interesting in that it involves a unicorn horn. Now, I don't think the show itself has done a great job about establishing the whole thing with the unicorns. It's interesting that I think it's only really the novelizations that made it clear the significance of unicorns, in terms of, I suppose, trying to help humans gain some sense of magic. And here's an example of them being used for their kind of like magical parts, basically, here. So it's this spell that uses, what is it, the horn of a unicorn attached to Sarai's weapon, with the magic being used on Sarai's like dying breath, as an ultimate weapon of revenge, used by someone who cared about that person who died. And it is interesting, the two of them just go out alone to confront Avazandum, but interestingly, they're allowed to get like really far into Zadia before Avazandum comes out to meet them. Now, they do establish that the reason for this is because, I guess, the egg, the Dragon Prince, has just been like laid. The egg has just been laid. Zubeia, the queen of the dragons, is off somewhere, so that's why Avazandum is being so cautious. And he actually offers them the chance to leave without him killing them. But of course, Harrow is now driven by revenge, and the attack comes in. Viren kind of locks Avazandum in place with magic, and Harrow gets slightly injured in the process, but does hit Avazandum with the spear, and it turns him to stone, and he dies reaching out for the Storm Spire, where the egg that has Zim in it is. And this event is what prompts the Moonshadow Elves to later attack at the start of season 1. And so this is us basically caught up with the kind of cycle of vengeance back and forth. I do like that the final battle, because of where it takes place, effectively is the gap between the remains of Avazandum and the Stormspire. That's the two armies sort of in a way like charging at each other there. I like that kind of Callum and Rayla have a bit of a discussion about this, because it's very complex emotions for like Callum, just making the note of like, we are walking past the kind of statue remains of Zim's father, the king of the dragons, an example of the cycle of revenge and where it has taken everyone. And they've all lost something because of it. But the hope for the future is that the sons of both, characters who've died in the middle of all of this are actually close in Ezran and Zim. And it's just this very, very complex situation of like Callum realizing that, like, yeah, that's my mother's weapon up there that my dad used to kill the King of the Dragons. It's a kind of crazy event to even, think about and consider. But, it's important to get that, because ultimately that's what the theme, in a way, of the first kind of 3 books of Dragon Prince is. It's about this cycle of hatred and sort of how to actually stop it, in that the book ends on this note of positivity going into the future. The Dragon Prince has been returned to his mother, and she wakes up to an immediately hopeful thing of, like, one, her son is alive, but also she sees numerous examples of humans and elves working together, and in fact romantic relationships kind of blossoming. So things that theoretically haven't been seen in a long time, because obviously we don't know the older history, like how united things were before something happened and stuff like that. So for her, I suppose, in her lifetime, this is the most hopeful things have ever been. But it's not complete peace between the human kingdoms and Xadia, just because it is a very small fraction of people involved here, in the sense that I guess you could say the Sun Elves now have an alliance with the humans. But that doesn't apply to basically any of the other elven races as far as we're aware. Sure, there's examples of characters from certain different races that would help, but in terms of like leaders of the elves, we don't have any idea. Now, I think it's going to be a good thing ultimately that the Queen of the Dragons ultimately agrees with this, and that the Dragon Prince is friends with humans as well. And I suppose it's just being known that a human and an elf work together, they happen to be in a relationship, were the ones who actually kind of restored the Dragon Prince. But so it ends on a hopeful note, but because of how deep the sort of issues between humans and elves, basically humans and Xadia, goes, as evidenced by the opening scene of the book, you can see why it doesn't necessarily mean absolute smooth sailing. Now, from the clips we've seen of Season 4, it doesn't look like we're jumping straight into kind of wartime or anything like that, but it also seems quite still focused on just sort of what we know, that there seems to be some sort of an alliance with the Sun Elves, just because they were there in the vicinity, but we don't know about the others, their situation. Because obviously, one thing that happens in this book is Rayla tries to return home, but she's been ghosted magically by everyone, including Ithari. And it's only Ithari like temporarily restoring the ability to talk to her that gets her anywhere here. So you can't even say that, even though there's a lot of Moon kind of related characters who support all of this, that the Moon Shadow Elves are suddenly fully on side. It feels like one of the ones where you can do that, but because we know what happens to what Rayla does in between books, if you've read the comics, or if you just know the setup from like one of the first clips that they showed us, Rayla's not around to be that kind of character to broker peace between them necessarily. But we'll have to, of course, wait and see how that goes. So, I suppose getting into Rayla and Callum, their arc is interesting because it's the main plot to get Zim back to the Stormspire. But interestingly, along the way, it is sort of just like traveling hijinks. Like they meet up with like Nyx, they have a bit of an incident there in the desert, the Oasis. Most of their arc this season is actually about the romantic relationship that develops between the two of them, which I actually quite like. But it does kind of happen somewhat quickly, though. I think they wait a long enough amount of time to fully commit to it that I think it works, even though it's still somewhat early in the series when it actually happens. Beyond that, Callum's arc is kind of weird because it seems like his arc is about just learning magic. But he learned the Sky Arcanum in the last book, and he only learns like one spell in this entire book. Yes, he does use some moon magic at the end, but again, it's not moon arcanum because he has to use the moon opal, which is a magical little item, to do that spell. And by the end, like that seems to be like one of the main kind of things that happens is like Rayla being back at the Stormspire reminds her what happened to her parents, which is not that they're gone. It's that she feels ashamed of them because the reports say that they abandoned their post. And so Callum doing the spell to relive what happened confirms that they didn't. And in fact, her mother's kind of prompting Viren to be like, hey, the egg is a useful magical artifact that you could use for something crazy in the future. Keep it alive. Is the only reason that the egg is actually still around. So that's a kind of notable point. Now, it is also the show being a little bit sort of like tricky with regards to like information here. Mainly when it comes to the whole idea of Rayla's parents are clearly also in coins as, you know, a few things reference. So I think we know for sure Rayla's parents as well as Runan are both in coins because of Viren's magic spell. The problem with the way Callum and Rayla talk about it is that it's not clear for sure that they see that this is the case. This is not, I don't think this gets confirmed properly even in the comic that's the Through the Moon. It just seems heavily implied that they should know because clearly the flashback that we were shown as the audience basically includes right up until that point. So why wouldn't they see it too? And then Viren jiggles the bag of coins in front of Rayla, but she doesn't like make any sort of a note as if my parents are in there type thing. So the way the information was presented on that one is kind of weird in that were they purposefully presenting it as the audience gets more information than the characters do or what? But still, that's an important one to get going into the final battle. Otherwise, Callum's arc is basically all leading up to he wants to do the spell that the Sky Mage can do, where he can turn his hands into mage wings as a way to fly. And he can't seem to do it normally, but in the last minute to save Rayla, he does it. So the implication seems to be that he could do it because he did it out of love and a want to save people. But he couldn't just do it normally even though he had the Sky Arcanum. It's a weird one because they probably haven't explained to us enough about how developing magic actually works. And especially with Callum, why he specifically was able to develop an Arcanum and no other human has been able to. Now, are they establishing that like a human can do it if they focus on these positive traits rather than dark magic, which basically revolves around kind of like negative traits? But obviously it's always a little bit sort of like, how technical are you being when effectively the power of love is what unlocked the spell for him? It's always a weird one when you say that and what exactly that means or not. But we have to wait and see what Callum's development is, because of course season 4 seems to be almost like teasing the idea that maybe he uses dark magic again. Maybe he hasn't progressed as much as he might have wanted to. That's going to be a big interesting thing because he only has one Arcanum so far, but he should be very close to the Moon Arcanum. And if they have a relationship with Sunfire Elves, he should be able to talk to people who should help him to understand the Sun Arcanum if he absolutely needs to. But we'll see how exactly they go about doing that. So that's the arc on that side of things. Rayla obviously had the thing with Athari where she's basically blamed by everyone else for sort of like abandoning the rest of the assassination squad, and they confirm through the sort of magical flowers that the others are dead. But then as they cut away from the scene for like the rest of the book, they do confirm that Runan's flower is sort of half floating. It hasn't completely sunk, but it's also not floating on the surface, but it's floating in the middle, basically. I think highlighting very much the idea that when you're in the coins, you're not considered dead, but you're in this kind of world between worlds situation, which is what Through the Moon covered, and Rayla basically did see sort of a vision of Runan and her parents. So we'll see what she explains about what her travels have been these last 2 years, when it comes to that point. And then how they're going to resolve that, because I guess a lot of season 4 is probably going to be building up to when the hero characters basically meet up with Viren, Claudia, and so on. Because if they're more on the same side and it's not direct conflict, there's going to be a ton of stuff that needs to happen between these characters if the truth about what Viren has been doing has come out, and all this sort of stuff. Getting into, I suppose, Claudia and Soren here. So Soren probably has one of the best arcs in book 3, just with regards to his doubt with his father. Basically being full on like manipulated, like full on, Soren knows what Viren was suggesting, but Viren's just like, no, that's not what I meant at all. And so Soren is made out to be stupid by his father. And I like the gradual progress over the course of the book, where Soren realized that his true loyalty is to the actual king. So helping Ezran, given what happened to Ezran, following his father, but then at the key moment realizing, I can't continue on with this. I do not agree with the direction that we're going in, and realizing that I think Dad is evil now. I have to go. And that goodbye scene between Soren and Claudia is notable for the two of them, because for Soren having the strength to realize that for him to be the person he wants to be, he has to separate himself from his family. But for Claudia, it's this really tragic moment, because we know she very much struggles with, people like leaving her. So that's what happened with the mother, and now Soren is doing the same thing. So she sticks and sort of doubles down in her loyalty to her father, and so she seems to be heading in that direction. And it's one of those really fascinating things going forward, like, say, in terms of what's the season 4 arc going to be. Now, of course, we know it's about Claudia resurrecting Viren and wanting to make that permanent, and basically making a deal with Arvos herself. But in terms of, like, where are they going with both Viren and Claudia in terms of, like, potential redemption, I'm guessing it's going to be a little bit of a role reversal, where Claudia will be the one more being heavily manipulated by Arvos this time out, but leaning in this direction. I think Viren will see, basically, like, oh, that's what was happening to me. I can't let that happen to my daughter. And we might get some sort of thing like that, and he has to sort of protect her from full on going down the dark evil path. And that's the strength of all of these characters, and the nuances that are going on. Because you also have to deal with, like, one of the bigger moments was definitely it turns out to be an illusion, but Soren, and in terms of the emotions of the scene, it was real. Soren basically killing this illusion of his father, not realizing it was an illusion at the time. And the shock from Soren, as well as the shock from Claudia, that he was actually willing to do that. That's going to be a big one going forward. Now, ultimately, as a character, I think we all know that was the right decision to make at that time to protect Ezran over Viren, but a big moment nonetheless that is going to, I think, affect Claudia and the whole family dynamic quite a bit going forward. So that's quite interesting. The Claudia scene leads to, like, the final scene, which is that at the time we felt like, oh, she's just resurrected him immediately after his fall. That's fine. But now, because we got one of the earliest clips of season 4 is just an extra little bit of dialogue added in there, that the scene from the end of season 3 is actually set 2 years in the future. That Viren has actually been dead for 2 years and is then resurrected. And this is an interesting one because it changes how we perceive the Through the Moon scene, which doesn't take place that far after the end of the series, confirming that the Viren that Rayla thought was like alive was full on Aravos, because at the time Viren wasn't resurrected yet. So that was a bit of a misunderstanding what she was actually being shown situation, which is quite interesting to consider. I suppose Ezran, like I mentioned before, it's an interesting thing to have him go back, and he gets like an episode to be the king. He gets to give a few speeches, make a few decisions that highlight that he does have the potential to be a good king. Very idealistic, yes, but probably what is needed at this point, because Viren always wanting to act regardless of the consequences in a way has caused quite a few problems, and he's eventually kind of put into a situation where, because he doesn't want to fight, he doesn't want people to die, he has to agree to basically abdicate on the condition that he can get whatever people who want to leave the fighting to leave. The other kingdoms won't attack Katalis, and then the people who do fight for Katalis against Xadia won't be doing it in his name. And it's this quite complicated situation where he has to go to prison, and you get that sort of prisoner exchange of like Ezran walking into Viren's cell, Viren walking out, and claiming himself as king. So his role reversal happens. He had to be patient, but it eventually happened. And this sets up the sort of march on Xadia, the attack on the Sunfire Elves that we get, which is an interesting point. Like there's a few things that happen on that side of things as well, with regards to like Amaya and the relationship that ends up forming there. We get to meet the current queen. The main thing that happens here from a plot perspective is that it's in this moment where Viren is being judged by the light that Aravos has his biggest effect on things. He's previously just really been a spirit who can kind of talk through the insect, but here he just full on comes out and possesses someone, effectively gains a physical form temporarily, and gains control of the Sun Staff, and kills the queen, while at the same time telling her that, like, your grandmother, who we just actually had a clip about the other day, involved in one of the flashback scenes that we're going to have in season 4, basically telling her something very shocking about, I guess, what happened to, or something the grandmother did, that is so shocking that she cannot defend herself and can only act shocked as she is killed. So that's going to be a big one whenever like that one comes out, because that queen is suddenly established to be this kind of legendary character, but something quite crazy and shocking happened. What's the deal there? They don't reveal what that was in this book. It is just something that is there. It happens, and we move on. In the middle of all this, I suppose Prince Kasif is an important character in terms of what happens, because we obviously find out that 2 of the kingdoms, their rulers were just like assassinated by the spell. Anya survives, but we don't focus much on Durin until she comes in at the end as like the main reinforcements. Neolandia, it's established that the king is in a critical state and is in a coma, so that's why the prince is sort of like the acting leader, and he wants to fight, of course, for revenge. And and in that sense, like he's a relatively simplistic character, because he's just meant to represent the want to fight, the want to further the cycle of revenge, and be that opposition to Ezran. And in that sense, it works. I'm just never particularly happy with the character arc that is, this character will just become a mindless monster because they felt this way. I think they took any depth and nuance that character had, because the kingdom was like a victim of this attack, and just turns him into a literal monster who, when he is killed, it is just the character is treated as a monster being taken down, rather than one of the princes of one of the kingdoms dying in battle. And especially because it was Anya who did it, it just kind of feels like, oh yeah, headshot type thing, rather than that's actually quite shocking the way this character died. But again, a role-playing character, not really meant to be like that important, but you know, a notable scene definitely. And yeah, with Viren, it's just like this is the case where the full kind of power comes out. There is the case of like what exactly the plan is, and there being a little bit of a sense here of, you know, Viren just wants to sort of protect people, but clearly Arvos wants him to have a plan that is grander, and this is the sort of sense of that actually happening. And if he can basically capture the Dragon Prince and kill the Dragon Queen, everything is going to work out well in their favor. So there's that as well. I think that's like most of the plots that we have here. I don't really think there's that much else. I think I've talked about like pretty much everyone. Okay, so let's get into some speculation on book 4 here. So here's the official description from the Dragon Prince website. They revealed this in or around, I think just after San Diego Comic-Con, I think is when they put this up. So, what it says: for the moment, hope has prevailed. Humans and elves now enjoy a tenuous peace for the first time in centuries, and our heroes have grown both wiser and stronger. And of course, 2 years have passed. With Amaya at her side, Queen Janai has rebuilt a home for the Sunfire Elves from the ashes of the corrupted core. Callum is now the High Mage of Katalis, inheriting Lord Viren's previous responsibilities and possessions. Ezran has fully stepped into his role as king, with Soren and Corvus serving diligently as his crown guard. Zim is no longer just a hatchling. Bait continues to break records for jelly tart consumption, and Rayla, on Callum's 15th birthday, convinced by a vision that Viren was somehow inexplicably still alive, she left everyone she knew behind to search for the man who captured her family and hasn't been heard from since. Meanwhile, under the direct guidance of Arvos, and after years of preparation, Claudia has resurrected Viren at great personal cost, but the spell is temporary, and he only has 30 days to live unless they free the Star Touch elf from his mysterious prison. With a new ally, Terry the Earthblood elf, at her side, Claudia is determined to follow the clues Arvos has left her and will stop at nothing to locate his prison in time to save her father. And they must race across the wilds of Zadia, deep into the Drakewood, overcoming new dangers and forging unlikely friendships along the way to stop Claudia from unleashing Arvos onto the world. So, that's the general plot. So it's all ultimately coming back to the resurrection of Viren, and that it has just happened. So this is a kind of reveal. This adds extra detail, and this is what the first clip that they showed off from the season was about as well. This reveal. The end of season 3 scene takes place 2 years after Viren's death. So, okay, Viren is back for 30 days, so a month to basically do what Arvos wants, and if they free him, then it can be made permanent. And this is the perfect way to manipulate Claudia, because we know she is very, very heavily affected by people like leaving her behind, and also the loss of people close to her. So from her point of view, she's basically lost her mother because of what happened in the past. Just in book 3, she effectively is going to have to interpret the things that happened with Soren as she's effectively lost him because they don't agree on things. She wasn't going to lose her father in all of this. So that's why she is putting so much into this. And that's going to be an interesting arc to see what happens here. It's obviously, one, the lengths that Claudia is going to go through to make this happen. But then two, what way is Viren going to be characterized throughout this entire book? He's been resurrected, but he's been dead for 2 years. Is he immediately going to be like, oh yeah, we can take over again? Or is he going to more focus on like, Claudia, what are you doing? Like, I can now see that you are doing what I was doing, and this is crazy. And, you know, what's going to happen here? I can see them maybe doing something where, to in a way help Claudia, he somehow gets across to her, this is not the right thing to do. Kind of let me die at the end of these 30 days. Don't, you know, free him. That would be an interesting way to sort of partially redeem the character of Viren, while, you know, obviously giving Claudia this major choice to make, because what if it turns out that she agrees to do it, but then there is no way to bring Viren back for good? That would be a crazy kind of thing to happen there. And that would put Claudia in a very interesting position. She definitely is one of the more kind of fascinating characters going into this book, to see what exact way she is framed in terms of like, is there hope to bring her back from where she's going? And especially because, like, based on the clip with Terry, that seems like a weird dynamic for her to have this boyfriend and him to be this kind of almost humorous character, given the intense desire to like resurrect her father for good. That's going to be the main focus of the plot. That's very interesting to me. I'm fascinated to see what exact way they're going to explain this, because this plot is from the comic Through the Moon. That's when it like happens, like on screen basically, is in the comic. So we've seen the clips in terms of the way they at least reference it, but I'm wondering, like, will they have any visual to showcase this, like, at all? I think they probably have to, because it's a major plot point to establish that, oh yeah, in the time gap between the show, Rayla just like left everyone and has been gone for 2 years, and clearly didn't accomplish everything she wanted to do in those 2 years, because unless there's some massive reveal, she hasn't freed Runan or her parents. It doesn't seem like she's necessarily come across information on Viren. Maybe she has, maybe that's how everyone finds out about it. We'll see how exactly that ends up working out. But this is going to be a key point, because this is something that devastated Callum. We know that from the clips that we've seen already. And given that they were only like together for like not that long, because again, their relationship only properly happens right in the middle of book 3. So they're not together as a couple for that long when she leaves. But interestingly, one of the short stories they gave us here is the letter that she left behind. This wasn't even in the comic. And as you can see here, like, I won't read out the whole thing, obviously, but like, it's a long letter, for a goodbye letter, to just get across that idea. I'm doing this to keep you safe. I love you. It's paragraphs upon paragraphs, and it's just, I'm actually thinking that I won't be able to go. It makes it really clear that she does care, but she still does leave, and leaves on Callum's birthday as well. And I think that's the whole point of the first episode being called what it's called is. So this is going to be important, because I don't think this can just be resolved by, and Rayla's back, everything can go back to normal. There has to be a talk about this with Rayla. She has to be able to trust the other people to help her out. They're a team in this. It's not just her on her own. So there probably is going to have to be a little bit of drama here, and I'm interested to see what exact way they do it. So I think that we'll see them, you know, back as a couple, but I wouldn't be surprised if Callum kind of struggles to maybe just have things go back to normal that easily, given what happened. Again, a lot depends on what exactly Rayla has accomplished or seen out there, because right now they only seem to highlight that she has this star primal monkey thing. That's her new pet. I don't know what the deal is with that. We'll see what exactly happens there. So that's that. Ezran as king, and they kind of cover the idea that there's like a tenuous peace between human and elves. I'm wondering, will they explain, like, is this very specific to humans and say just the sun elves and maybe moon? Like, how much of the elves comes into play here? Because obviously there's so many of them we haven't met, like the water ones, the star ones outside of Aravos, of course, we haven't met. And then like the Earth ones, apart from Terry, we also haven't met. So there's like more than half of like the entire kind of main population of Zadia that we don't really know about, and is enough to say that like a couple of human elf relationships has created a peace between both sides. So I'm wondering how in depth are they going to go on that front. Yes, I think we have a couple of characters that can be sort of people to sort of bridge the gap between humans and say a specific race of elves. Like they have the Sky Mage that they met, so that seems relatively okay. Rayla only comes back at a certain point in the story, so they're, and then she is also sort of basically exiled by most of her people, so that's a bit of a weird one, but bringing back the Dragon Prince should be enough to fix that. So there's confusion here about just the extent to which the peace actually exists, because if it's just peace between humans and Zadia, then they can go wherever they want without any complications. But we know that, for instance, say like Sol Regum is always going to hate humans, and I assume the same is going to be the case for like a lot of the more kind of like ancient beings. Like not everyone will be able to just move on from the cycle of vengeance that happened, and like the fact that dark magic technically still exists and stuff like that. There's all those sort of things that are going to come into play. But they seem to be focusing on stuff like this, that with Janai and Amaya basically in a relationship. At least with the Sun Elves, they have this important kind of connection because they fought together in the big battle at the end of Season 3. So that's important. Soren and Corvus are the Crown Guard. And all of this is stuff that if you go on the website, you can see that this is a story, the newest story here. I think they said this was the last one. It's just highlighting that like Claudia used dark magic to try and resurrect her cat when her cat died. She does struggle with loss and sort of like attachments and stuff like that. That's what they're going for with her character. Here's the one with Soren and Corvus, where Soren asks Corvus to join the Crown Guard. That's a nice little story there. This is the letter that Rayla gave to Callum that I just showed you. Here's an Amaya Janai one. Here is where Ezran gets his new crown from, that it's forged from his father's sword. Here's like Callum coming into, like, gaining possession of like Viren's room basically and coming across the mirror. Here's Janai and her brother. Here's which one is this? This is another Aravos one as well, and the same with like the Midnight Star one. So if you want to read those stories, it's gonna, I suppose, fill in a couple of gaps in between things for you if you aren't familiar with every aspect of the story that's kind of happened. So some of that stuff is quite good. What else do we have here? This is a new thing that they just put up a few days ago, one of the new clips. Now, they're saying that this is information from Chapter 4. It's just a kind of clip that covers a little bit of flashback stuff. And obviously it has some very interesting lore, basically just introducing us to characters. That Luna Tenebris was the name of the Archdragon of the Moon, the former Dragon Queen. We have Domina Profundis, Archdragon of Ocean. Rex Igneous is the Archdragon of Earth, who we have here, I believe. So at some point, this is where we're ultimately going in the season, is to some sort of underground cavern where we need to either go where this dragon is guarding for some reason or what. That's going to be interesting. Abzandam. Aditi is interesting in the context of, like, there is that mystery about what was the other queen told about her grandmother just before she was killed by Aravos? What is the secret about Aditi, given what is presented about her in this specific scene, that she was able to sort of like help broker peace in a way between in a era of conflict and stuff like that. There's some interesting stuff. Not to mention the Orphan Queen of Katalis, which, they seem to establish that she is sort of where the whole Key of Aravos thing comes from, which, again, I'm guessing this is going to become a pretty major plot point in the season. You see the cube in quite a few trailers, not necessarily in a massive capacity. But again, you have to remember, it is called the Key of Arvos, and it played an importance in the past, and it's going to unlock something in Zadia. And is that what they're going underground for? To unlock whatever it is? And does it relate to freeing Arvos or something else? That's the kind of truly, I think, really, really interesting stuff. And obviously this is the Earth aspect of, like, we are going to, based on the episode titles that we have here, again, officially revealed, you could sort of see that, like, okay, Great Gates, we're going to the Drakewood, which is a region in Zadia. We're going underground. Rex Igneous is the name of the Earth Archdragon. An escape from Umber Tor. I'm guessing this is going to be the name of Rex Igneous's lair, basically, this underground area that they need to go into. Beyond that, like, it's difficult to fully predict, like, what way they're going to go in terms of, like, we know now, this is the other reveal that I mentioned at the start of the video. They revealed that they've changed up the format of the books again. Now, Mystery of Arvos is not just season 4, 5, and 6, and then season 7 is going to be a new subtitle all on its own. They've actually incorporated season 7 into Mystery of Arvos, meaning there won't be a production gap between 6 and 7, and that actually Mystery of Arvos will be just 4 groups of 9 episodes long. Now, I'm not sure if that is a massive change or if that's just a slight production thing of them realizing that, like, the final season isn't that separate than the other seasons. We don't need to separate it that much. Let's save ourselves a year of, like, extra production where we just break for no reason and just add in and do 4 seasons in a row. I can see it maybe being something like that, where, like, instead of feeling the need to call it, like, Dragon Prince finale, Dragon Prince end of Arvos or something like that, you're just like, yeah, this can just be the final season of Mystery of Arvos. That's perfectly fine as well. It's still going to have its book title of whatever book 7 is called, whether that is the one that they call Star or they call it Dark for Dark Magic or something like that. We'll see what they do. But anyway, looking at all the clips and stuff like that, it's one of those ones where, like, you have to remember that, like, it is just 9 episodes we're getting here, where we probably will not cover as much ground as we perhaps think we will, just because we have to get introduced to the world 2 years on, time skip. We have to set up where we're going from here, reintroduce characters, and also have a further trip into Zadia to more of the Earth-related kind of thing. So, plus, it is going to be sort of just the first quarter of this second stage of the story. We now know there's going to be 3 more books that cover the remainder of what happens here. So, how much progress are we going to happen here? In that, like, we have to assume Arvos is going to be freed at some point. Like, it will happen. Does it happen in this book? Is that the cliffhanger ending here? Or is this just the first stage and it will be the next book, like Water or whatever they call it, that will be the one where Arvos properly comes back into play? But then we do also have the cocoon thing, which I guess is going to be some physical form that Arvos has control over, which is what I think actually was the thing that Rayla felt was alive based on that vision that she saw. That's going to be key. It's very interesting to see just, like, where they go with it, because this seems like it's going to be the book where they properly kind of tell us some stuff about Arvos, of, like, okay, the little clip that we saw that relates to this scene here, the Fallen Star clip, basically just says, oh yeah, Arvos is basically responsible for, like, nearly every conflict that has happened in Zadia, in the human realms, and effectively almost between the two of them as well. So, like, they're fully committing to, like, Arvos as being this puppet master. The question is, like, how many of his kind of mysteries and reveals are going to, like, fully come out here? Because they're, what seems like, basically, like, accusing him of, like, killing a previous like queen of the dragons, and all of this other stuff of like, you know, he's potentially led multiple leaders to their doom and all this sort of stuff, and now he's planning even more. Again, from book 3, you have to remember, according to Arvos, it was Avazandum who was the one who imprisoned him somewhere, and he doesn't know where he is. So the question obviously is like, where is Arvos trapped? Like, I'm assuming just the core like answer to that question will come out here, that for them to find out how to free him, they have to know where he is. So I'm assuming that is going to be one of the reveals that actually happens here. And I'm fascinated to see what it is. Like, are they just going to do some sort of, oh, it's a mirror world, it's the same world as like Rayla was in Through the Moon? Or are they actually going to say that like he's like on a different like planet or moon or celestial body or something like that, because he's a Star Touch elf or something like that? But then it speaks to like, wait, how did Avazandum put him there? Because he's like a sky dragon. What is the situation with that? So that's something else that's pretty interesting. With regards to the other human kingdoms, I think there's a few things you probably need to do. Like, I'm guessing we'll get to see Anya, just because she also is another young leader who's kind of coming into her own. That would be nice to see. But the other kingdoms are kind of important ones, because you just didn't kind of really cover a lot about the rest of them, because you sort of had just sort of like Prince Kasif sort of represent all the other kind of human kingdoms for the most part. But 2 of them, just their rulers have been killed. And then Neolandia is now without its prince, and their king is in a coma. So are they going to establish that the king is like up again, or what's happening there? How important necessarily is it even to cover that much of that stuff? But, you know, just thinking about all the details of like, it was a pretty major what happened here, like chaos in all of the human realms. Like, you need to cover a little bit more than that. I suppose going back to Callum a little bit. Obviously the whole thing with Rayla is going to be something that affects the character. It does seem like now that he is in the Viren position, I'm guessing that means sort of like stuff like Viren's staff or something like that. It looks like Callum has his own magic staff. We'll see if it's related to the one Viren has at all. But he has stuff like the mirror now. So that means Callum is, I guess, sort of open to Arvos's manipulation. And because Callum has the key, which Viren never had, that might be something really, really key. No pun intended. So is Arvos going to like sort of like teach Callum like sky magic, the sky arcanum? Because I'm guessing, like they've said before, that like there's a reason Arvos knows all of the forms of magic, and I think Callum probably needs to get to that point. And in a way, it feels like he's the only character who can learn sky magic, given that I'm guessing the Star Touch elves, we probably won't get to see much other ones at all. We'll see what happens there, but we have to, I think, progress just Callum and learning magic, and where he's at with dark magic now. The whole Arcanum thing, and especially because like this is now two seasons in a row, book 2 and book 3, where Callum's main arc was basically learning the Sky Arcanum and then learning a Sky spell, which he did through basically the power of love. So I think you need to develop that more. Have him learn another Arcanum and just show us more about why that is happening and the significance behind it. That's what I really want to see them do with Callum, and show where we're kind of heading with him. Other than that, like Viren, like I said before, just remains very, very fascinating to see. Will he just try and revert to the character that he was in season 3, 2 and stuff like that? Or is he going to be changed now because it's just the crazy sequence of events that are happening, and that it's more Claudia and Arvos, and Viren is just kind of along for the ride? Or is Arvos Viren going to be this kind of dynamic like the previous seasons going forward? Because I suppose technically, like, Arvos never like betrayed Viren, so there's nothing, I suppose, inherently that would immediately turn Viren, other than just the shock of like what is happening in this situation. But we have to wait and see what happens, because Viren is pragmatic. So if he is able to sort of see that, wait, a peace has basically been achieved between humans and elves, why am I trying to stop this when things are actually okay? And then it's Claudia just supporting Arvos to save Viren, and she is suddenly threatening, in a way, the thing Viren actually wants. But is Viren okay with it being achieved in the way it was achieved, and it being a balance between humans and elves and not humans in charge? Does that matter at all in this? Because obviously it doesn't really matter to Claudia since she has an elf boyfriend. But she, like Viren before, is heavily informed by just protecting what she cares about. So I don't know. Tricky situation, like to know and trying to like obviously predict every single step of the way what exactly is happening here. But I like the setup here, because what it means, and I think what we're eventually building towards, is obviously when the group that is sort of like Callum, Rayla, like Ezran, when they meet up with, say, Claudia and Viren, and like Soren potentially involved in this as well, there's a lot of key dynamics that have to happen here. Obviously, the family. How does Soren feel about meeting his father again after what he kind of half did with killing the vision of his father type thing, the illusion of his father, and knowing that Claudia like saw him do that. Claudia knowing that Soren effectively like left her, like sided against her in that conflict. Does that change anything or not? That's going to be an important one. Rayla, how much does she know exactly about the whole coin thing? Because book 3 and even Through the Moon never fully made it clear that she 100% for sure knew that they were put into coins by a dark spell by Viren. But this seems to suggest that that's the case, that captured her family. So Rayla finding Viren is a key thing to see what happens. And then, is that spell reversible? Because if it is, she suddenly gets back a ton of people that she really cares about, and that changes quite a bit. You suddenly have all these characters left who haven't been in the story for quite a while. And that kind of fixes a lot of things for Rayla, for sure, as a character. Callum talking to Viren suddenly becomes an interesting thing if he gains experience talking to Arvos in the mirror, and being like mages, and like how would Viren feel, for instance? Like I don't think Viren has ever said anything or does even know that Callum has an arcanum and can do magic without the use of a primal stone and stuff like that. Does that change things for Viren? That dynamic coming out. So there's a lot of key things with characters reuniting here, and exactly how they do it. That's going to be very interesting to see. I'm guessing at some point we will get a magic showdown between Claudia and Callum. It just feels like that kind of has to happen. But what state both characters are in, what style of magic they both go to use, will be somewhat telling. And yeah, just in terms of world building and stuff like that, I'm eager to just see more of Xadia, more reveals come out, because I like the world of Dragon Prince, and I think there's a lot they can do. But I'm also keeping in mind just that to keep my expectations in check, just because having rewatched book 1, book 2, book 3, it is only 9 episodes, and in some ways you can cover a lot, but it is only 9 episodes. It's not like a full season of a show. It's this weird amount of episodes that will be a fraction of this new section of the story, Mystery of Arvos. That's the important thing to keep in mind. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on both book 3, having rewatched it, as well as what are your final thoughts heading into the Dragon Prince season 4? What do you think is going to happen specifically? But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.